This week, we've got Allie Mellen from Forrester to discuss XDR. Then Vincent Berk from Riverbed joins us to talk about the importance of network visibility. Finally, in the enterprise security news, at least a dozen cybersecurity companies announced raises totaling more than $900 million just in the past week. Not even going to try and name them individually. Permira proposes to take Mimecast private for $5.8 billion. That's a big one. The leader of a Swiss tech company is accused of selling access to text message data for surveillance. A former Ubiquiti developer was behind the big breach announced earlier this year. He unsuccessfully tried to extort his employer. SentinelOne tries to bring mobile security back. Google and Trail of Bits team up to release a tool that scans for vulnerable Python packages. CISA has assembled a panel that will begin making cybersecurity recommendations. Make sure to stick around for this week's Spicy Take and this week's Squirrel Story. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. People require access from anywhere to resources everywhere, but legacy security is ill-equipped for today's hybrid organization. AppGate SDP delivers zero-trust network access for hybrid workforces and workloads, empowering trusted users with secure, frictionless connections to only what they need. Make your attack surface invisible and reduce time to provision by 91% with AppGate SDP, a leader in the 2021 Forrester ZTNA New Wave. Learn more at securityweekly.com/AppGate.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. Today, we should all browse over to Digitally Imported and fire up a music stream because today is World Techno Day. For those of you who remember Digitally Imported. This is episode 253, recorded on Thursday, December 9th, 2021. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is Mr. Tyler Shields. Hello, Tyler. Do you remember Digitally Imported?
I was, as you were bringing up that topic, I was trying to remember. Trust me, I listened to my fair share of EDM back in the day, like old people EDM, and I vaguely remember that name. But was it a channel?
Yeah, it was a whole website with all kinds of different streams. Like they had, drum and bass broken out from house, depending on what flavor, of electronic stuff you like to listen to. They had all sorts of different bit rates, because back then some people were still on modems and broadband was fairly new. So,
Yes.
You didn't just stream music. You had to find a music stream that your internet connection could handle.
Yeah, I definitely remember that. I don't know if I blocked that out of my head or, it kind of is just fuzzy and blurry from that era of my life, but I vaguely remember it.
And what would you stream it with? What Llama-associated application would you use to stream?
Yes, the MP3, the streaming app, the Llama. Oh my God, what was it called?
Winamp.
Winamp. Yes, I remember.
All right. Also joining us today is Katie Tietler. Hello, Katie.
Oh, hello. And no, I do not remember. Nope.
It was a very hackery thing.
I didn't even have my own computer until, well, I'm not going to say the year. Way later than you guys did.
Fair enough.
Adrian, do you remember the skins for Winamp? You got to do your own skins?
Yeah.
And everything? Yeah.
And for those of us that really geeked out on skins, we went with a different player called Sonique. And Sonique did not stick to like rectangular skins. It could be circular, a bunch of circles stuck together. Like those skins were crazy.
Yes, and then you had the plug-in visuals that you could add to it as well. But yeah. Okay. Old person stream is now over. Let's get to a real commentary.
All right. One announcement for today. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover in one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review these suggestions on a regular basis and we'll reach out to you once they are reviewed. All right, now today's first interview, the topic is XDR. something that here at Security Weekly we've been diving pretty deeply into. Also diving deeply into XDR is our guest today, Allie Mellen, industry analyst at Forrester Research. Allie covers everything SOC related, everything having to do with the people, the processes, the tools of the Security Operations Center. And she's becoming a bit of a regular on our show. And part of that is we appreciate her candid approach that cuts through typical vendor marketing sales fog and tells it like it is. Welcome, Allie.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. So this is not as far back as what you guys were talking about, but my first mosh pit was actually at an infected mushroom concert. I was very into techno back in the day, and I ended up breaking my ankle. It was so terrible, but really fun.
Story. Like that's pretty legit though. Like that's yeah.
It was a fun time right up until the end.
Things you never thought you'd hear Forrester analyst actually say.
That's great. Yeah. So kind of diving back into history like that. A common question we'd like to ask people is just how they meandered their way, how they moshed their way into the security industry in the first place. So maybe a few words on that, Allie, before we dive into XDR.
Yeah. So I actually was getting my degree at Boston University in computer engineering. And there was a cybersecurity class, and it was a grad level class. I was really excited to take it, although I didn't know much about it. And I kind of, wasn't sure how that was going to go. But I spent the semester doing some really hands-on stuff. A lot of it was like our midterm, we had to hack a server, similarly, but with more advanced techniques for our final. And we had to do a midterm project. And that project was either doing our own security research or recreating someone else's. And my professor at the time was very obsessed with Black Hat. He thought it was the coolest thing. And so I ended up doing with a couple of my colleagues some research of our own on hacking the square reader. And my professor thought it was so cool. He was like, you need to submit this to Black Hat and just see what happens. And so we did, and it got accepted. And so my first real experience with the security community was flying out to Vegas and presenting to a bunch of hackers on hacking the square reader. And it was such an amazing experience for me. And how can you not do that and just fall in love with security immediately? So from there on out, I was convinced that this was the space for me.
I am deeply jealous. I've been in this industry for 20 years, and I can't say that I've submitted many things to Black Hat, but none of them were accepted. So that's a pretty kick-ass start.
Thank you. Yeah, it was awesome. It was so great. The community was really, really awesome, and I met a lot of cool people. So I kind of got hooked from there.
Yeah, I mean, straight into the deep end. You make a bunch of connections, networking. At security conferences, at least before the pandemic, was definitely the way to kind of jump into the deep end and get going.
Totally. Yeah. I actually took a step back and was working on my engineering consultancy for a few years. But in the back of my head, I was always like, I need to get back into security. And finally was able to.
And we are glad you have. And with that, maybe say a few words about what you've been doing with XDR. And it's interesting because everyone here right now, all the hosts and you, Allie, have all been industry analysts at some point in our careers.
That's
awesome.
Fact,
Tyler was also at Forrester.
Yeah. It's so cool how that happens. There's such a great analyst community, I'm learning. Even though I've only been doing this since January, it's been really the whole analyst community, regardless of which organization you're at, which firm you're at, has been really welcoming. So that's been a treat.
And so give us a high-level rundown of the research you've done on XDR, I guess, in terms of, what kind of reports you're putting out and what the goals of those reports were at a high level before we dive into some of the details.
Definitely. So as I mentioned, I started at Forrester in January, and my first real mission was to figure out whether or not XDR was something worth writing about. So I spent 8 months just researching XDR, talking to vendors, talking to end users currently using the offering, talking to industry leaders, everyone that I could who had a perspective on XDR to figure out what it actually was and what it wasn't. And it took me down a lot of rabbit holes, and I ended up publishing the first piece that Forrester has defining XDR from the Forrester point of view, and then also a new tech, which is Forrester's market overview to identify all the different vendors that are playing in this space and how they are broken out based on their lineage. And then also a new wave on XDR, which is that evaluative piece of research that we do. And that had, I believe, 14 different vendors in it, all claiming they had an XDR offering. So the waves are quite a bit of work. The new techs are thankfully a little bit less work in that first piece of research, given that it was also the first piece of research that I ever put out was a lot of interviews and conversations, but those 3 pieces of research gave me a really good understanding of the market and of where offerings are today, and also of what the next couple of years looks like when it comes to XDR.
And I'm just going to key in on something you said there, claims to be XDR, the companies that claim to be doing it. How mature is this particular market, both in terms of maybe the market as a whole and then the companies in it? Is it too early for customers to get into this market, or are some of the vendors mature enough to dive in?
Yeah, so one of the main differentiations between the Forrester New Wave and the Forrester Wave is the maturity of the market. We typically do new waves on markets that are not mature at all, and that we kind of want to give our end users an idea of what's going on, but not necessarily go all out and do the full scope of a wave that we would on a more mature market, because there are just so many changes happening in the market at that time. So I would say that XDR is fairly immature, even though it's been talked about since around 2018. And there's a massive divide in the vendors who are actually delivering on XDR today and those who aren't. A lot of that comes from 2 different perspectives. You have the SIM and security analytics vendors who are trying to kind of latch onto the buzzword and kind of struggling to explain how their XDR offering is differentiable from their SIM or their security analytics offering. And then you have the EDR vendors who are talking about XDR because all the other EDR vendors are talking about XDR, but they don't seem to have anything that's generally available that would really qualify as anything more than EDR. And then you have that third category that are actually able to deliver on combining telemetry across sources, including endpoint and others.
And you've already touched on it a bit here. I'm just going to one more question, and I'll open it up to Tyler and Katie to ask some questions as well. But you've probably heard at least 24 sales pitches for XDR at this point. Could
I wish it was only 24. I wish it's been like hundreds. Oh.
Can
sorry,
you
go
give
on.
us?
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. Yeah, sorry to trigger.
Pity party.
Yeah. But you're moving on now, at least, right?
Yes, I am.
Give us a sales pitch for XDR. Why would we want to use XDR? Does it replace something we already have? Is it an evolution of something we might already have, or is it something additional? What is the sales? What is XDR, and what's the pitch for it?
Yes, awesome. So this is the way that I typically explain it to practitioners that I talk to a lot of our clients. So we've had this philosophy that has taken hold of the market for about 20 years. That's the SIM philosophy. This is the idea that we can put a bunch of data in one place and perform analytics on top of it. SIEM vendors take this approach because it gives you the ability to customize the rules you're creating, perform your own analytics on top of it, take in as much data, and ultimately get as much visibility as you actually want. There's a lot of flexibility that comes along with that. And now, given the move to cloud, there's a lot more opportunity for scalability as well. And we've seen the SIEM market evolve to incorporate things like UBA and like SOAR, which has lended itself to addressing more aspects of the incident response lifecycle, and also customizing more aspects of the incident response lifecycle, because that's what SOAR really provides you, is this opportunity to integrate with other tools and to build workflows based on what your specific use cases are. Awesome. Very useful, particularly useful for security teams that are adopting technologies that don't necessarily yet have a security point solution to defend them. So they're able to do this for custom applications, for example. That's a really interesting use case where you don't really have point solutions that are going to defend those effectively. Or before a lot of cloud security products came about, the ability to protect cloud to some extent by bringing in cloud logs into your security analytics platform or your SIEM. Now, there's a different view of the market that has really started to make a splash in the last 10 years or so. And that's the EDR point of view. Now, EDR's point of view on the market is what's most important is to protect where the business data is, which has classically been on the endpoint. And this has really taken hold with incident responders. They really value the telemetry that EDR provides and a lot of the features that EDR has. But inevitably, they still need to bring those EDR alerts and that EDR telemetry into the SIEM anyway, because they need access to other telemetry in the environment from the network, from email, but they just can't get access to it within the EDR product. So that's the first problem, where EDR vendors are like, man, we really wish we could cut out this middleman and not have a dependency on another product. The second is what we all know, the business data isn't really on the endpoint anymore. It's moving to the cloud. And with that shift to the cloud, EDR vendors are facing a bit of an existential crisis because the endpoint is losing its importance and the cloud is gaining importance. And so
you might say they're having a blockbuster moment, right?
Yes, actually, yeah. I think that they're recognizing it faster than Blockbuster did, unfortunately, RIP, but yeah, absolutely. And so they are recognizing this and making efforts to also protect the cloud and to kind of extend beyond the endpoint. These two factors are what play into EDR vendors moving into XDR, where XDR is really the evolution of endpoint detection and response that's able to incorporate additional telemetry sources to give you the context that you need to be able to take an incident from start to finish within that platform. So it's really about expanding EDR with not only detections from other telemetry sources that the vendor deems are important, but also bringing in context from other telemetry sources as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
I have a question.
Go for it.
So you're talking about bringing in telemetry from other sources. When you say telemetry, are you talking about like event data, things that are happening, or structural cyber asset state data, meaning my cloud instance is configured in such a way, or my container is built up in such a way? Is it more structural or more event kind of action data, or is it both?
Yeah, it really depends on it depends on the control point that you're talking about. Especially around cloud, we're seeing more, it's that structural side, like I guess you would say around the vulnerabilities and less around the actual threats or attacks that are happening in the environment. But obviously with endpoint, it's more on the event side. And there are a couple of other use cases in there that vendors are exploring, like Microsoft and Trend Micro, on bringing in telemetry from other sources like identity and other aspects.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense given. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Katie. I jumped on you.
I was just going to ask, I know that there are different perspectives in the market about having an XDR, which is one holistic platform, versus the idea of different components from different vendors. And there are pros and cons to either. Do you have a perspective on what XDR actually means in terms of vendor deployment?
Absolutely. So the thing that I found, especially with this new wave, was that the native XDR vendors miles ahead of the hybrid XDR vendors. They have the portfolio and they're really bringing these pieces together effectively. And in contrast, a lot of hybrid XDR offerings currently, or some people call it open. I don't like open. I have a development background, and so it reminds me of open source. But the hybrid perspective is about integrating with other products. And so those vendors are actually not nearly as far along as the native XDR vendors. We see a lot of those offerings being backed by services in kind of a mechanical Turk style situation, which is fine. I think of MDR providers, and I talked to Jeff Pollard, one of my colleagues on the security and risk team, about this quite often. MDR providers are the original ones who were able to deliver on XDR. Now the product vendors are just trying to catch up. But there are very few implementations of hybrid XDR on the market today that are actually completely working with a product as opposed to working with a services backend. Given that, what I've seen so far is the real differentiation on what XDR providers are able to give compared to something like a SIEM is coming from the native XDR side, because the vendor owns all the telemetry that's coming in. They decide what telemetry is coming in and what depth and integration has. And they're able to base their detections on the things that they know are happening in the environment. And so they give you a very structured basis for the detections. And they're also, since this is a SaaS product, building those detections for you over time. Now, the difference here, there's one thing that's worth noting here, is that there's a bit of a nuance between the native XDR vendors and those who are calling it XDR, but are really just using the name as a security analytics layer across their entire portfolio. And you see this particularly with vendors with very large portfolios that are just saying, hey, you can look at all these alerts in one place. That's not really delivering on what XDR is doing with these leading providers who are really building detections based on everything that they know about the environment because they own the whole thing. Hybrid vendors have the opportunity to do this. It's just a little bit more difficult because they have to rely on these partnerships, and they have to choose these partnerships very carefully to maximize the detection quality.
Right. So there are pros and cons, obviously, to either, but it sounds like the companies that you found working best right now have a little bit of a legacy, maybe because they had a head start, maybe because they have the resources already in-house to build it. That's a really good insight.
Yeah, they definitely have a head start, and they definitely have a secret sauce that's working for them, which I found interesting. In all the customer conversations that I've had, they really, for the native XDR vendors, the feedback on the quality of detections was incredibly positive. They basically did not have to worry about the tool. They just let the vendor build these detections, and then any other detections that were more specific to their environment or took into account other sources than what the native XDR offering could provide, they just did in their SIEM.
So it's also less work on the end user / buyer side too, it sounds like.
That's where I think that the importance of this really comes into play, because let's face it, when you're thinking about building detections, you need the talent to do that. So you need a threat intel manager, you need a threat hunter, and you need a detection engineer. The threat hunter and the threat intel manager feed into the detection engineer who's building these detections, et cetera, et cetera. Those three roles are really hard to hire for. They're really expensive, and they're incredibly hard to retain, especially for an internal SOC. vendors are the ones who are able to collect all of that talent because they typically have a lot of startup funding, they make a lot of money, and they're able to offer better compensation, better working hours, potential career path progression that you can't necessarily get in an internal SOC, especially a medium-sized or small one, or one that maybe is large but not structured as well. So that 100% is a factor here too, is taking off some of that skill requirement and putting it back on the vendor without necessarily needing to go so far as adopting an MDR offering, and just having it be a part of the product and part of what the product is delivering on.
Makes sense.
So one of my questions here, one of the things I wonder about is what XDR is potentially going to replace. You've already talked about some of the roles that are hard to hire for, that it can potentially, at least offset, the need for some of those roles. But if somebody hasn't even heard of XDR yet and they're shopping for EDR, should they just stop and be looking at an XDR solution instead? Is EDR just going to become a feature of XDR, or do you see a future for EDR to continue to exist as a standalone product?
Yeah, so this is very good timing because yesterday I released a blog post on an EDR now tech that I just did that I called EDR mostly dead, only mostly dead. Because in a previous report, I had referenced EDR as dead, and XDR being its successor, which I still hold is where we're going. But it may have been a bit premature because there is definitely still interest on the client side to have an EDR offering. But a lot of those conversations are turning into a blurry line between EDR and XDR. So XDR 100% replaces EDR in the SOC. And that's a large part of the conversation with end user clients today is they're trying to figure out, should I buy something that's a good XDR now, or should I buy something that's a good EDR now and then grow into XDR later? And it really depends on where you are in your journey, because if you're looking for an EDR offering, I'd highly recommend going with the best EDR offering. That's not necessarily going to be the best XDR offering, and you can tell that by the difference in the previous EDR wave that Forrester released and the XDR new wave that we most recently released. But all EDR vendors are moving towards XDR right now. And that's a part of the reason why I talk about it as EDR is mostly dead, is because the XDR vendors or the EDR vendors are pushing towards XDR, and they're largely accepting that as their future instead of EDR. And so I think that over time, we're going to reach the point where EDR kind of fades away from the picture and is replaced by XDR. And if you don't have any integrations into XDR, then it's just EDR with the XDR name, I suppose.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I followed really closely was the endpoint market. And right when Next-Gen AV started to come out, things like that, I did a pretty deep dive into the history of endpoint security. And at one point, you'd buy a product just to have a host firewall, before Windows added a firewall, before Mac OS added a firewall into the operating system. Same thing with whole disk encryption. And eventually all these features, got lumped into something we called EPP. And then again, with the second round, when Next-Gen AV came out, when EDR came out, there were a bunch of different separate tools for that. For a long time, the Next-Gen AV folks weren't comfortable saying you can ditch your traditional antivirus or your EPP, but they got there. And a couple of years later, 100% their marketing is saying, yeah, you can ditch that now. We do all that as well. So I'm just kind of, really curious to see, how things mature here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's coming from both sides, right? On the one hand, you have EDR vendors who feel like they're getting pulled towards XDR. But on the other side, and one of my colleagues, Chris Sherman, has written about this extensively, you have a lot of features that you associate with EPP that are just being built into the operating system or are being given in some capacity to the end users that are using them. And so it does create this interesting place for EDR vendors and traditional AV vendors, where they are kind of getting, it's like a tug of war, and it's kind of a who's going to win Squid Game style. So I suppose it is particularly interesting. And I think that in the next year, we're going to see a lot of developments in this space that are going to be really compelling as to what the future of endpoint security looks like.
As we start to wrap things up here with the interview, tell us a little bit about what you're moving into now that you've finished up a lot of your XDR coverage here.
Yeah, so I have removed the shackles of XDR, but not actually. I'm still definitely in XDR, but I'm able to kind of look at the SOC more holistically, and I'm really, really thrilled to be able to do that. I just gave a keynote at Forrester Security and Risk Forum on the future of the SOC, and it's a piece of research that I'm so excited about and thrilled to be releasing in Q1 of next year. I'll also be getting into EDR a little bit more. I'm in the process of doing a now tech on SOAR vendors, so kind of a market overview on SOAR vendors. And I have a lot of research around the state of security operations and of enterprise breaches, very, very data-driven research that I'm just thrilled about. Honestly, I have way too many ideas, but those are just some of the ones that are at least like 85 to 90% of the way written.
Yeah, that's a lot to bite off there. I mean, there's so many opinions there on where it's going to go. There's so many people I see experimenting with different models there. And at the same time, the SOC is kind of functioning as, an entry point into our industry. So I think it's really interesting to see what happens with those kind of entry level junior SOC analyst roles.
100%. And I actually am just wrapping up we do these reports at Forrester. They're just job descriptions to describe what the role should look like and try to help CISOs to more easily be able to kind of identify what the skills that they should be looking for are. And I just wrapped up one on a security analyst role. And one of the things that I'm pushing very hard in that research is this idea that this is an entry-level role and we need to treat it as such, and to set expectations a little bit better on what experience is expected, and then build out a development path based on that. I think you're dead on when you say that it is the entry point into a lot of different security functions. And a large part of that research is also, okay, now you have them, and here's what you need to do to grow them into other functions, because this is the start of your pipeline, not the end.
Very exciting stuff, Allie. We'll have to have you back on once you release some of that research and we get a chance to check it out. But thank you for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk network visibility with Vincent Berk from Riverbed.
are the safest workloads in the multi-cloud. Private cloud, public cloud, any cloud. Stronger, with distributed protection to the API and everything east-west, inside, and cross-cloud. Stronger, with 3 layers of detection, trusting nothing and seeing everything, even the best hidden bad actors. Stronger, with an SE Labs AAA certified advanced NDR that brings the multi-cloud together for the win. You've got workloads, we've got security. VMware Security. Simply stronger. Visit securityweekly.com/VMware to learn more.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Throughout 2022, CRA's Business Intelligence Unit will be releasing research reports on the top topics across the security industry. Our first report will be on third-party risk and the supply chain. Very topical. To participate in the survey, please visit securityweekly.com/third-party risk. The results will be shared in our third-party risk e-summit in January. All right, and for our second interview today, this interview is sponsored by Riverbed, and Vincent Berk joins us today to talk about securing the invisible, how holes in your visibility fabric form the cracks where hackers hide. Vincent is the CTO and Chief Security Architect at Riverbed. He sets the vision and strategy for network performance monitoring within the cybersecurity business unit there. He came to Riverbed through the acquisition of FlowTrack, where he was the founder and CEO. Vincent also has a PhD in machine learning and large-scale data analytics, which could tempt us into some sidebar conversations. Welcome to the show, Vincent.
So it's good to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just talking about your background. Maybe share a little bit with us about how you meandered into security in the first place.
You know, that is actually the crazy story, because I got my PhD in machine learning in the early 2000s, which is when pretty much everybody believed we were in a machine learning AI winter, right? Like there was just there were algorithms and there were ideas, but it wasn't really moving the needle in terms of sort of application use cases. And to me, it was interesting because when I was doing my early studies, I was always a high performance computing guy, right? Like it's all about scale, right? Like the problem in the 1990s always was, we can't execute algorithms fast enough. And therefore, if we can parallelize them arbitrarily, right, then the idea is that if you use a lot of computers, you can get that job done faster. And so I sort of rolled into machine learning from that perspective. The problem is in the early 2000s, when you got your PhD in machine learning, you might as well not have gotten a PhD at all, because there was no work for that. And that's how you kind of roll into cybersecurity. So I started out my career trying to see how we could use diverse signals from cybersecurity and bring those together and sort of make sense of it. And what I mean by that is, right, like, if you think about things you might see on the network, and then you combine those with logs, how do you reason about those things and bring them together and come to a single conclusion? I found that an interesting problem back in the day. So that's how I rolled from machine learning and data analytics into the cybersecurity space.
And little did you know, you didn't have a crystal ball, but you definitely stumbled into something pretty good there. Well,
and I think that's it's super opportune to think about that, like in today's day and age, because the network environment because I spent years as an incident responder. Actually, that's sort of the other interesting sidebar to that. I started a career trying to figure out how to bring these diverse signals together and reason about them. Right now, that's not so much something that people were thinking about initially in the 2006, 2008 timeframe. But then I spent years as an incident responder. I actually doing operational security work. Then I went into product, where the very first problem one tried to solve was a problem of scale, right? And we know that from the major SIEM systems as well, right? Like how do you bring these enormous volumes of event data together just so that we can search on them? And I was, of course, in the networking space. We were doing that with network flow data and packet data, right? Same sort of scale problems persist. And I think that what you're hinting at is the evolution we went through, sort of from how do you capture this much data and make it searchable, presentable, define rules and reasons on it, all the way to how do you combine two different signals that are wildly diverse. And if you'll let me, I'll give you an example of what I mean by that, right? Like, for example, you might get 1,000 or 10,000 failed login attempts to a SQL server, right? That's obviously some kind of brute force attack or some script having gone awry. And you can you can pluck this apart in a SIM. You can figure out whether the same username was attempted, different usernames, passwords, and what have you. Right? Those are 10,000 signals. Now, there might also be one that was successful, right? You get through. They had a successful login on that brute force attempt. And that's probably going to come at the end, right? You stop trying passwords when that happens. Those 10,000 failed ones are not nearly as important as the one successful one. And that one successful one is ever so more important because you had the 10,000 failures before, right? And those are, to me, very interesting data analytics problems, right? And we're doing that today with a lot of brute forcing. And we only now are starting to see people building in like, hey, you know what? This is by nature interesting to humans. How can we automate that stuff? So if you're asking about a digression into machine learning and kind of techniques to apply there, right? I think that's sort of where the state of the art is going, and where we need to start, where we need to start putting our investment.
And you really hit on one of the things that's really bothered me about the way a lot of security tools are designed and how they report things. In that, when you tell me there's 10,000 failed logins and one successful, to me, that's two events. It's the first event was somebody trying to get in, and the second event was they got in. Like, I don't care that that's, yes, physically in the log, it's 10,000 different lines, 10,000 different events, but any rational person who has a background like yours and has done IR, has done threat hunting, and this, by the way, happens over in vulnerability management as well. There's a lot of noise that's just duplication of a single signal. If I have an old version of Java, it's entirely possible with a 3-year-old version of Java, on multiple systems in my network, I can get 200,000 vulnerabilities out of that. And even today, a lot of these systems won't tell me, oh, you got an old version of Java. They'll tell me you get 200,000 critical vulnerabilities, and you have to spend a couple days, exporting it to Excel and playing with pivot charts to figure out, oh, I just have an old version of Java. So where are we in getting towards that, where, kind of translating this data into something that makes more sense to humans, I guess?
So I think that's a really good question. And I'm going to probably anger a lot of my close colleagues and friends at other businesses that are working on this problem. I'm going to say we're not very far. But I'm not saying that because the techniques we're using aren't working, because I think we're way, way further than we were sort of 20 years ago. I think one very good example to draw, and I don't know how familiar you are sort of with convolutional neural networks, but if I give you 10,000 photographs and you go through it, you'll have no problem classifying what every picture is, right? Like, that's a tree, that's a car, that's what have you. And it doesn't really matter to you whether or not, right? There's 3 cars in that intersection, right? And you recognize the intersection. It doesn't really matter to you whether it's, night or day, whether it's snowing, whether it's the light is off, or whether the photograph's blurry, right? Like, that might be happening, or there's some random noise, or you get a black and white version of it. You probably still recognize 3 cars in an intersection, right? Seems straightforward because we're trying to do all this computer vision stuff for self-driving cars. Okay, so it's easy. Your brain's a neural network. We take a neural network for image recognition. We should be straightforward to do that. Well, it turns out it's really hard, right? So we tried that. We tried training neural networks on large databases of photographs, and just a little bit of random noise can completely destroy the classification we see. And the same exact thing is happening in cybersecurity. And I'll give you the example. I'll carry it one step further. So how do we approach it, right? What we're doing is we're still using all manner of traditional image processing techniques to try to rotate the image that's in front of us, or do segmentation, or try to identify first the moving objects and then to try to do image classification on that, right? And we're trying to stack traditional techniques but the more machine learning style techniques that come up to a sort of a conclusion of, yeah, this is an intersection with 3 cars, and then you put a truck in it and the thing's still confused. Why? It's because we are putting a lot of rules in that inference to make use of that little bit of sort of machine learning brain power we have. And the same thing is happening when I'm looking at logs. And I'm using logs because most people in cybersecurity are really familiar with that, right? There's a lot of good tools, that are log collectors in which we create rules and we, use AI. My background is, as I described, behavioral analytics on network traffic, and that the story there is identical. Right? It's almost exactly the same. The point being is that when we look at the kinds of rules we're creating exactly the rule that you are describing. These 10,000 failed login attempts should be together considered one event. And then the successful one, if it comes pretty rapidly in sequence, those things are related. And this is a really bad sign. And we are only now seeing the best security analytical systems start putting those sort of things together. And what I mean by that is you get sort of these fused rules, like rules, you can create one rule that grabs all the failed login attempts. You can combine it with a successful one. And then I'm still putting in that logic that you would call blatantly obvious, right? Like 10,000 failed ones, and then a successful one coming from the same IP address. Well, that's probably not good, right? You know that. And if it happened in a different order or on a different service or a different, the signal was different, you'd still see it and be like, I know what happened here. And we are still in a place where we're effectively creating these rules almost by hand to recognize it. We're still almost at the level of using machine learning with aided by expert systems technology, right? Like, so I think, again, to say we're not very far simply means to say we can go much further in the years to come, and we've come a long way, but there's so much more to do.
So I have a follow-up question on this for you. Would you say that we're still lacking in algorithmic improvement, or are we simply lacking in the creation of the rules? And I know, that's not a true ML term, but the creation and understanding of how to apply the correct quantity. Like you mentioned the 10,000 failed, 1 good. That's kind of one scenario. Are we just lacking in our enumeration capability of all possible scenarios? Is that where the gap exists?
So it is algorithmic in many ways. The problem is we call this generalization, right? So if I show you 5 pictures of an apple, and then I show you, and I tell you this is an apple, and then I give you another apple, and you look at it, you probably be like, oh, that also looks like an apple, and right, and you'll be able to generalize, right? You say like the thing is round, the thing is probably yellow or green, and the thing's got a little stem on it, and maybe a leaf, right? Whatever, it's the size of my hand, right? So you quickly sort of build out an understanding of the thing called an apple, right? When we're in machine learning, what ends up happening is, well, if I show that apple a number of times, I might get something called overfitting, where what I'm looking at is this apple, and I'm only gonna, I'm gonna do 100% correct on the 5 apples that I've seen. But if I see another apple, I can't generalize to it. And I think that this generalization is where we're struggling. And the reason I'm pointing this out so much, goes back to what we were earlier discussing, right? Like if we see the evolution of threats that are happening in the environment, and we see the way that our networks are evolving, which is effectively, right, we're a lot more remote, but we are also building way more complex services, right? Complexity is just a factor that ends up happening in computing in general, right? And started a long time ago with, well, I wrote a library to sort data in a binary tree. Well, that's good. Someone else can use it. Now they don't have to write it again. So they will use my code, right? They use my library, and they build another library that has 5 other sorting mechanisms in it. And that becomes a bigger library. And then that ends up being included. And so complexity is sort of a thing, right? Like we're able to build better cars today because we're able to optimize technologies we've built for cars before and build upon that. We do the exact same thing with software. We do the exact same thing with networks. We build more complex things. Like airplanes are more complex now than they were a long time ago, right? When we first started flying. So as we built this complexity, What ends up happening is we lose the ability to reason about it generically, because indeed your search space gets so much bigger, which is exactly what you were getting at, right? Like, we can't enumerate all the possible ways in which the bad guys can hide. No, that's exactly right. We can't, and we never, ever will be able to enumerate all the ways in which we can compromise a network or we can get in, because as networks get more complex and evolve, and as software gets more complex and evolves, there'll be new ways in which it will break, right? Ways that may seem somewhat familiar to something we've seen before, and that we're only going to be able to catch when we can generalize the problem a little bit better, right? And that's where I think a lot of the growing in AI and ML in the cybersecurity space has to happen.
So, in continuing the image recognition, examples there, does cybersecurity have a lot of blueberry muffin problems, or just a few, or is that something that you see a lot?
I think they're not easy to recognize, I would say, right? Because we are making good progress. But one thing that ends up happening a lot in my line of work, right, which is really interesting, I didn't think that would happen, is Riverbed has traditionally focused on WAN optimization. It today focuses a lot on visibility, network troubleshooting, data collection on the endpoint, data collection on the network to try to figure out why a user experience is bad, what have you. Surprisingly, we get called by security incident responders all the time, right? This started when we were acquired into Riverbed, and it's still happening today. And the questions always are, right, traditional defenses have failed. Someone got in. They got in deep, they got in wide, and now we need to know what happened, where the traffic went, from where they came from, in the various ways. And it's just an incident response, right? And that affords me a fairly good view of how incident response and also traditional cybersecurity is, and I start to see patterns there, right? And what I mean by that is, in that incident response process, we tend to go through, right, what Riverbed collects is, packets and logs and endpoint data, but not endpoint detections, right? There's a distinction there. We could talk about that. But the point is that the tools are forensically recording stuff that happens on the endpoint and the network and the server and what have you, so that we can go back later and say, geez, why was it slow or why was it breaking? Except that when you record that data, you can also exactly see what the bad guy did and how they did it. And if I look at that, right, with a background in incident response, I start to say, well, the SIM didn't pick it up, or the SIM picked it up, but there were 50,000 events just like it that had nothing to do with that. So it wasn't very well able to generalize this, right? So is this a blueberry muffin problem? Yeah, absolutely, right? Like we have gotten really good at detecting some things really well. And I say that because my background, right, like what FlowDrag did was, we were a company that was just building tools to find those 10,000 failed logins, but in the network traffic, right, like the behavior of the network traffic, and then alert on that. Now, what is the problem with that, right? When that exact pattern happens, yeah, the detectors will catch it and will warn you. But it took how long to build those, right? Some of these rules take weeks to build and evolve to the point where they're reliable detectors. What is the change in technique that the adversary has to do, right? Use different IP addresses, change the timing around a little bit, figure out if, spraying different host names, right? Like there's a simple, like the cost on the attacker is way, way lower than it is on the defender still today, right? And I see that in my daily work. And that's that blueberry muffin problem you're talking about. Yeah. If the hacker behaves just exactly as we built our detectors, AI or no AI, then yeah, we're going to find them. If they just ever so minutely tweak it because they know they're being watched.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me shift things, maybe zoom out a little bit, take a bit more of a macro look at the process here. From a threat hunting and IR perspective, I see, and to kind of further go into Tyler's question, three gaps here. The first gap is just visibility in general. Do you have a sensor to gather this data? I call that the system saw it happen. and you saw a bunch of vendors coming out of the SolarWinds, the whole SolarWinds debacle, saying we caught that, and that's great that your system saw it, but that doesn't mean people saw it. So that's the next gap. A human saw it happen. It's great if a system saw it, but that's just step one. A human has to see it to take any kind of action, unless everything's fully automated, which I don't think most of our IR teams and businesses are fully comfortable with at this point. And then the last step there, and really I see this when doing postmortems on breaches and studying breaches a lot, is most of the time the technology worked fine. It wasn't the technology that failed, it was people and process that tend to fail. And that third gap, that third level, is a human both saw it and understood what it was and what to do with it. So we see a lot of cases where back in the Target is a great example, where FireEye caught the bad guys. Somebody from FireEye called them up and said, "Hey, you've got a problem," and they're like, didn't do the right thing with the information. So I think those last two gaps, making sure a human sees it and making sure a human knows what to do with it when they see it, which I think is much more on the enterprise side, training things like that, than something you can put on the vendor. But to some extent, the vendor can help with both those two latter gaps, I think, making sure people see the right things and see them in the right context, that they know what to do with them.
So what I think you just did is you just teed up an hour's worth of discussion and market analysis. So I don't have. I'd love to have an opinion on all of this. In fact, I do. But let's take this in reverse order, right? Because the first thing you're pointing out, or the last thing you were pointing out, the first thing I'm going to react to is the process and procedure problem, right? There's an enormous amount of process and procedure that is missing. And it is exactly what you say. It is an educational issue, but it is not just on the people need to get better degrees or better training, right? Because if I've stood up about a half a dozen or so cyber hunt teams over my career, helping groups do that. And the first question always is, okay, we outsource that. No, you can't outsource it, because you want someone who is really knowledgeable on your enterprise and your infrastructure too. Can we combine this with the NSOC? No, you can't. You really want to make sure that the guy that does that is out there hunting and doesn't have incident response, right? So you get to very rapidly to someone who is skilled and has seen a few things. And what that means is exactly where you're at with your question on process. Okay, we found something. It was made aware to us, and I looked into it, but I didn't recognize it for what it was. I followed the book, I re-imaged the machine, we're all done here, right? But little did we recognize is that the compromise happened because domain password was compromised. The next machine falls right for it. The hacker's now a little bit more careful, right? It's really, really, right? The worst thing to do when you eradicate, a bug infestation in your house is only spray half of them, because very rapidly they'll evolve to not care about your pesticide anymore. And that's exactly what you're doing, right? So that process thing, if you found something, is this indicative of something bigger that is not ingrained in enterprises, and it needs to become that way, right? So that's that process piece. The other piece you talked about is the question of making the human aware or fully automating. I only have one comment about that. The comment is very simple. There is no better anomaly detection and correlation engine out there than the human mind, right? And so no matter how good we want to make our machine learning algorithms, right, we're still at the level of a snail, right? Like we're not very good in making AIs, right? We can barely navigate, right? So at some point, when we build software and when we build tools for assisting cybersecurity, we need to recognize that it is the most important task we have there is to make use of that really powerful correlation engine that is the human. And how do we do that? We have a responsibility as tool builders to make sure that we surface those things in the right format and the right way to consume so that human brain can do that correlation to the best of its abilities, right? That absolutely means that if you have 50,000 of the same alerts, yeah, you can say you saw the SolarWinds hack, but it doesn't really mean anything because nobody was indeed aware of it, right? So this is a human-machine interface. How is software consumed, and how do we make good use of the human in the operations? That question is absolutely something that's right on the vendor. And then finally, you said, well, it's all useless if you can't see there, right? And that gets right back to when I was asked for a title here. You so aptly read the whole thing out, right? Like there's the cracks in the visibility where the hackers hide, but that's actually, it's a little bit fastidious, but it's absolutely true. And it's not just get visibility, but it's get angles of visibility. And I'm going to give you one example of what I mean by that. Okay. When the military is concerned about a theater, right? Let's not pick on the Canadians coming from the north because I'm at the northern border, but imagine they are, right? What do we do? Do we just get like one guy with binoculars and put him on a hill and say, call me when the Canadians start mounting up, right? No, we don't. What we do is we put the guy on the hill, and then on the next hill, we put another guy, and then we get a radar, we get an infrared, we put a satellite up there. We're going to fly an airplane overhead. And I know very little about military technology, but one thing I do know is that we seem to have a lot of visibility technologies in the military. We're using different types of cameras, sonars and radars and what have you, to observe one and the same environment. And from different angles, things look different, right? And so when it comes to your comment about we need to gain better visibility, I say we need to gain better visibility and diversify our visibility. So what does that mean in practical terms? In practical terms is logs are not enough. They're absolutely necessary, but they're by no means sufficient, right? And so think about other types of data you can collect. And what I mean, the next logical thing is like capture packets, all right? Well, that can be helpful, but, see about flow data. And often this data is already being collected in the enterprise, right, by the network operators. Think about endpoint data. And I don't mean, EDR data. I don't mean detection data. I mean simple data on what process is running, who is logged in, what is using CPU, who's making network connections. I mean, and keep it forensically. Keep a big data lake on that stuff, or get a product that can remember that, because invariably the question always comes, oh, they were on that system, huh? Oh, here's a process name, and it was using 100% CPU because they were crypto mining. Now, is there any other system in my enterprise showing exactly the same behavior, right? You want that to be a right-click pivot, search for this process name, more than 80% CPU, tell me all the hosts in my network that are doing that, right? And that's what I mean by angles of visibility. So there, in 5 minutes, I think I tried to cover all those three points.
Remarkably well, I might say. And you also hit on one of my biggest pet peeves of SIMs and NDRs and security products. At least back in my history working on the as an incident handler, I hated when you'd hit a detection and then it would grab a few packets around the detection and just after it, and inevitably what you would need to understand the incident would be the 2 or 3 packets that came before the detection, but you never got those packets. So it was always frustrating to me to not have the full flow data or to not have the full packet capture in a lot of those environments. And that's where I ended up going, was going after full packet capture. Even if I just had a rolling couple of hours worth, it would help me kind of find those smoking guns and understand how some of these intrusions were working. So I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, I think that is by far the story I hear the most in the field these days. And there's a point to why I'm going to reiterate what you just said. It'll come quick. So here's what I see. So I had that exact same frustration. So what I used to do, right, when I did this kind of work, we still could get enough hard drives, and the link, when you're on a T1 link, at that point hard drives were still big enough, and you could keep a few days of raw packets. There was also not a lot encrypted yet. these days, links have the growth of link speed has by far outpaced the growth in hard drive speed, not capacity, but hard drive speed. So it's gotten a little harder. The funny thing about this is that when I joined Riverbed, I was in the flow business. I wasn't in the packet business. And I was saying, oh, you got these packet appliances. That's really interesting. What are you doing for security with that? Oh, we don't use them for security. I say, that seems odd. Because you're capturing packets, petabytes of packets. And you're not giving us, no, I don't think we have security use cases. So I called a few customers. I said, are your cyber guys aware that you're capturing these packets? Oh, yeah. They got their scripts right set up. I'm like, what do you mean? And then I started discovering that I would say 60% of Riverbed's customers, the cyber guys had already figured out that there were network performance appliances capturing packets. And they had really simple scripts that kick off to an API that said, grab me, 10 minutes before the incident, an hour after with these IP addresses and ports, and make that into a capture file. And, these appliances were doing that happily, right? So I actually discovered that the cyber guys were already doing that, right? Which is why Riverbed's now putting a lot more emphasis on share the tooling, because it is useful for both operations, performance operations, and security.
It's a great anecdote because the exact reverse happened to me. We got a SIM because we had to be PCI compliant, and very quickly the rest of IT figured out, hey, the security group has this system that has all the logs poured into it, in one system. And so anytime there be any kind of outage or anything like that, they co-opt us to do root cause analysis and figure out why systems went down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also, I guess, if there's any real point to the discussion that we're having today, right, is that, sharing that telemetry, whether it's logs or packets or flows or endpoint data, event data from the cloud, right? Bringing that data, know you own it, make it accessible to both the teams is going to get you a lot of bang for the buck, right? Like if you are going to buy a flow or a packet appliance, and then the security guy is going to do the same thing, then effectively you're going to get half the recall for the dollar spent, right? Like you share that stuff, you can get a lot more angles of visibility. The other thing I'll say about that is that as you're making selections for tooling, think about which tooling has that forensic capability in it, right? Like a lot of tooling that we're buying is blinky light goes off when we detect something we know how to detect, but we don't store the raw data. And raw data is expensive, and I know that, but invariably, the most insidious advanced persistent threats were mostly evidence-free, and you need all the data you can to figure out what happened. I call that full fidelity. And with that, right, is define, the point that comes with that is that, listen, as you buy tools, full fidelity tools, don't spend all the money on detection tooling, but think about visibility tooling as well, because the time will come when you need to answer a very critical question that cannot be answered by simply looking at the blinky red light only.
100%. And that's an excellent place to end it. Vincent, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Riverbed to learn more. And we'll be back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.
When it comes to your network, visibility is imperative because you can't secure what you can't see. Riverbed's network performance management solution gives you 100% network visibility 100% of the time. Now you can resolve performance issues and security threats up to 90% faster and reduce response time, damage, and cost spent on remediation and containment efforts. Connect with Riverbed today and learn how their NPM solution can protect your network by visiting securityweekly.com/Riverbed. Picture your team being able to map out the external attack surface as it grows and see the same attack vectors as a hacker does. Most tools out there do asset discovery, but stop there. Enter Detectify. It takes an inventory of exposed web assets and automates vulnerability testing for security misconfigurations, expiring subdomains, and risks in third-party software. Here's the cool part. They crowdsource payloads from leading ethical hackers. It finds bugs you actually want to fix and finds them in time. Start a free 2-week trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. SOC analysts are often overworked and underappreciated. In fact, 78% say that working in the SOC is very painful. Yikes. Devo recently celebrated the first ever SOC Analyst Appreciation Day to pay some long overdue kudos to you and encourage organizations to improve SOC analyst job satisfaction and mental well-being. If you missed the event, no worries. You can watch all the sessions on SOC career development, overcoming the challenges of SOC work, and more on demand. Visit securityweekly.com/Devo to watch.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. In an overabundance of caution, we have decided to flip this year's Security Weekly Unlocked to a virtual format. We will miss seeing you all in person, but we hope you can still join us at Security Weekly Unlocked Virtual. The event will now take place on Thursday, December 16th from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You can still register for free at securityweekly.com/unlocked. Also, don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. We just wrapped one up with Palo Alto Networks on XDR. It was a pretty good one. I thought that, along with Allie's interview earlier today, between those two, you can really wrap your head around XDR, I think. All right, now on to the news. If you want to follow along with the different news items that we're talking about today, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW253. All right, the big thing today is about a dozen fundings, 900 million, or billion, sorry. Million? No, million. I don't
900
know.
billion.
I don't know
900
anymore,
billion.
but
That's a lot of funding.
Numbers.
Yeah, but from what we're talking about, would you be shocked if it were 900 billion? It would be like, okay.
My brain just doesn't know what to do with these numbers anymore. Yeah, so a dozen of them. We're not going to spend a ton of time on any individual ones here, but let's start out with some of the bigger ones first. First up, we have Clarity, which I think is supposed to be partially a play on words, since they they aim to protect OT devices, OT.
Yep.
Operational technology.
Yeah, that's the intent on this one. They're growing pretty quickly, and I think of all of the funding rounds listed in the news this month, this one's probably the one that has the most validity and the most actual return and growth and all of those things. I mean, obviously, when you're starting to talk of valuations with Bs, things are always questionable as to whether it makes a whole lot of sense to be valued that high. But, I think of all of them out there, the Series E, 400 million, bringing their total invested to 635, it probably does make sense that they might actually be the closest to actually having this value. The other thing I would tell you about this particular one, SoftBank Vision Fund 2 was involved. There's a small number of investors that seem to be hitting all of these big ones. SoftBank, Tiger Global, Lightspeed, and there's one or two others that, whenever there's some kind of astronomical valuation that's out of control, it's usually one of these guys involved.
Is that partially because they're the only ones with the funds to handle raises this big?
It could be. It could be a self-fulfilling prophecy on not having the funds otherwise. But I think it's also a portfolio construction question, right? So as a venture capitalist, you try to create a portfolio of investments that will return the highest return on invested capital for your limited partners. And I think these are the guys that have accepted the fact that, hey, literally I can invest large sums in tons of companies and still expect that if I get one or two of them to be successful, I can return the entire fund. And they're not afraid to take that risk and put that money at risk at that larger level. It's just an interesting portfolio construction problem.
Well, I imagine for them, the worst problem would be not having that funding spent somewhere. Like capital that's not that you don't put to work can't make you any money.
Absolutely. There's two things that are kind of the worst case scenario for venture capitalists. One is not being able to put the money to work. Your limited partners have given you access to the capital. They expect it to be invested as quickly as possible. The second biggest problem after not being able to put the money to work is putting the money into things that never exit, right? They hit that zombie status and sit there. Mm-hmm. That's another bad state because you never get the return. They don't really care if it fails. I mean, they do. They don't want failures, but they would rather see a rapid failure so that they can write that off the books and look on to the next one as quickly as possible.
Yeah. The only thing that makes me scratch my head a little bit here is that it seems like ICS security, OT security is a fairly niche market, and they've got almost $700 million in funding at this point. Looking at Forrester's Wave, just to get an idea of who else is in this market. The other two companies in the leaders, it's not a quadrant. I don't know what they call it in the Wave. In the darkest blue portion of that wave is Cisco and Tenable, which, if you had me guess who Clarity's competitors were, I might come up with Dragos. I wouldn't come up with Cisco or Tenable.
Yeah, no, I don't know the market well enough. And actually, funny enough, I had the opportunity to invest in this company twice, and I passed both times for exactly what you suggested. I felt it was a niche market, and it just goes to show you I was wrong, right? Well, maybe I wasn't wrong, but certainly the valuation would have skyrocketed from when I could have got in. So, but yeah, I would have never pegged the competitive companies that you're picking up on.
And I think it says a lot about the market itself that it doesn't quite know what it is, right? It's an important market, the OT ICS market, but I don't think it quite knows what it is in terms of cyber yet, and I don't think companies quite know where they fit in. Yeah,
there's clearly something there, though. I mean, if they've got the revenue to dictate this type of valuation, there's clearly something there. And when we start to think about security of physical items, physical plant, right, the total addressable market's enormous. There is tons of physical items out there that aren't properly secured. So, yeah, I just don't think I know enough about the space to really say whether it's going to win or not. It's just neat to see it growing quickly. So this will be one I'll watch closely.
For sure. The fact that they're getting into healthcare, speaks volumes about what people are worried about, and the fact that people are actually thinking about it in those terms now. Even 5-10 years ago, people were thinking about it, but not doing a whole lot in that space. So, Clarity is a good company. Hopefully this will be a great merger, and something will happen here, something big.
Yeah. It's funny when I look back into when I was building up and in the mobile security space, it was, I could have swore that the mobile security market was going to be the next biggest thing, absolutely blow it out of the world kind of market, and it never materialized.
Yeah.
And then the IT/OT side of it's kind of been a similar thing, right? It's I've never seen it blow out, but maybe it's just one company's cornering the market, and that's what you're seeing.
Yeah, could be. And I think part of this, is ignorance on my part, because I don't know the exit options for an ICS OT market, because there's a lot of stuff, like Schneider Electric, a lot of companies outside of security, that have a vested interest in OT and ICS security. And I don't know those markets. Those are not markets that I know much about. Like, for example, a couple months ago, we saw an automotive security startup get acquired by LG. who, most of us know LG maybe from buying a monitor or a TV, or I think they're out of the smartphone market now, but they used to have a lot of smartphones. And it's just not a market I know. So it's going to be, I think, super interesting to see where some of these go, because I think I've got a list somewhere of about 36 OT security startups.
One other thing that I just realized, for those of you that like to read these funding announcements and try to decide, was it a good one, a bad one, or whatever, this one, and I've seen it happen before, they didn't put the valuation number in there. And usually if they don't put the valuation number in there, it's because they raised $4 million on a $1 billion, a flat $1 billion or something, right, where they're giving away a huge chunk of the company to do it. So if you don't see a valuation number, that's typically that either the valuation is below their competitors and they don't want it out, or compared to the money in, it's not substantial enough, and so they're worried about the number getting out. So it's just a little data point. I have nothing on this particular one to back that up with, but I did notice they don't talk about the valuation.
Yeah, always interesting. All right, let's roll to the next one here. Panther Labs, I know little to nothing about. I think you know this one a little bit better, so I'll let you take this one, Tyler.
Yeah, I only know Panther Labs because I've seen them as a cloud scale security analytics company developing infrastructure security and compliance platform. So I do believe that they may be dancing around the space that Jupiter One plays in. So that's why I kind of try to keep my eye on them. They've been around for a few years. They got a $1.4 billion valuation on this particular round, and I'm trying to get the article up to show. Do you have it up, Adrian, to show how much they pulled in with that?
Yeah, it was 120. The raise was 120 million. I think actually 140. It might have been topped up. Oh no, they're saying a total of 140. So the first round was, I guess at seed or Series A, was 20 million, and then the second's 120.
Right, and here's the catch, right? This is one of those situations where if you have it up in front of you, who are the investors? I'll bet you it's one of those guys that I mentioned from the beginning that are pumping up the prices.
Snowflake, Lightspeed.
There it is, right? So, when those guys get involved, they're just recognizing, hey, I can buy the market. I'm going to take a big shot at it. If it hits, great. If it doesn't, that's okay, because all I need is one of these to get acquired at 10 billion, right? Just one, and I make everything back and then some. So. The cybersecurity market is just so hot from a valuation standpoint, they can get away with overpaying for a lot of things. So, here's the thing. I state all these statements like I know what I'm talking about, but back when unicorns were first coming out as a thing, I thought it was the dumbest idea ever. Why are we valuing all these cybersecurity companies at $1 billion? It's so much money. Why do you need that? And it's that seems like peanuts now. So I definitely don't claim to have a crystal ball and can say whether this is going to be good or bad, but it definitely freaks me out.
Yeah, well, for folks who don't know, you do have money put where your mouth is. You're an active investor in security companies.
Yeah, let's not make that overly grand of a statement. I put a little bit of money into a few companies. I am by no means a major investor. I do a little bit of angel work. When I find people I like to invest in a product in a market that I think makes sense, I do put a little bit of money to work. But it's just interesting, to see how this is going to play out. $10 billion, and what do we decide they were called? Octacorns or something?
There was a decacorn as well, and it's in some article.
Yeah, maybe our super producers have the wonderful rainbow unicorn decacorn overlay ready and available. But yeah, I mean, just when you think there it is, that's right. Just when you think $1 billion is a lot, apparently 8 to 10 is the new black. So,
and then occasionally somebody misspells unicorn as Unicron. And for the Transformers fans out there, I'm like, no, a Unicron is 50 billion, valuation of 50 billion.
Now help me understand. So I watched my Transformers, but what is a Unicron?
Unicron was that guy who was like as big as a planet that would consume planets.
Oh, wow. Well, maybe these are the Unicrons. I mean, it's getting there.
So it's an apt misspelling because, that's what I associate it with, is this huge planet consuming, well, Well, I mean, obviously it's a bad guy in the comic.
Might be a bad guy in this reality as well, though, Adrian.
He's actually sort of oddly neutral. So let's not go down that rabbit hole too far. Let's move on here. We've got a blockchain security firm, Certic, raises $80 million at a nearly $1 billion valuation. So again, talking about security firms that are getting outside my comfort zone in terms of the market area and the potential exits here. This is another one.
Yeah, I would love a briefing. If anybody from any blockchain security company is watching this show, I would love to get a briefing on what your product does. Because I thought in my super limited purview of blockchain, that blockchain was inherently secure. So what are we doing to secure the blockchain?
So from the ones I haven't dived into this one, I don't think, but the ones I have done a little research on what they're actually technically doing. It's just like traditional fraud prevention, like you'd have, like banks would pay for, except with blockchain.
That layer. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're looking for transactions at that layer and then looking for fraud within the transaction, similar to financial fraud in a bank.
Yeah, they're looking for patterns and stuff like that look like fraud. So basically loss prevention, fraud detection for companies that actually manage the crypto.
Yeah, and so to read it right out of this press release on TRM Labs, which was the second of the two blockchains that got funded here, TRM developed the first blockchain intelligence platform that combines cross-chain data with threat intelligence, advanced analytics, and intuitive visualizations to help organizations detect crypto fraud and financial crime. So yeah, it's a financial protection, anti-money laundering type of solution, which, given that major large companies and large enterprises like I forget which ones have done it. Was it Trend? No. Tesla did it, and a handful of other companies put a bunch of money in crypto 6-8 months ago. So it makes sense for them to have to try to understand how that stuff works from a financial fraud perspective.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, no FDIC backing there. Once it's gone, it's gone.
It is gone.
in most cases, unless you have the FBI to recover some of it, like the pipeline case there.
Yeah. Either way, I'd like to see a briefing from one of these blockchain intelligence companies at some point in time. Maybe I'll reach out.
Yeah. So you mentioned TRM Labs. That's number 5 on the list. They raised $60 million.
Tiger Global.
Yeah. And are there any others on the list that you guys want to cover here? There's a few I want to touch on, but I'm going to skip some of these. And the ones we don't cover, I'll just go ahead and read the short version.
No, man, you take it and run with it. I just looked down the list and love all the names, right? Adlumin, Casada, Grip, Truffle, some cool names in here.
Well, if you're going to read the names, you might as well.
No, you do it, man. I just said the names. You talk about what the numbers are.
All right. So Iron Scales raised $64 million in a Series C. We just talked about another blockchain company, though they pitch it as blockchain intelligence. TRM Labs raised $60 million Series B. Torque, TORQ, raised $50 million in Series B. They're doing security automation for looks like maybe a DevOps spin there. They say modern digital enterprises. When I hear that, I think, okay, they're going after the DevOps crowd.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the next one, Adrian. Read the next one, but I have a comment on it.
Yeah, definitely. Git Guardian, who I have briefed with, and I have tested their product. Though I've not written a review of the product because it didn't fit into the attack surface management space, which I was reviewing at the time. Git Guardian raised $44 million to offer comprehensive code security, which is not what they're currently doing.
Yeah, I don't know the history of the company, so I can't talk about any pivots or anything like that. But I can tell you what has me excited about. Certainly the buzz in the press release. I've not had a briefing, I've not had a demo, but the buzz in the press release and kind of how they position themselves in the press release is interesting because I'm a big fan of the Git Ops security model, which I may have mentioned on the show before. but really looking to secure applications as they're being developed, right? Which is the old shift left paradigm in the AppSec world, but it's being applied in the new paradigm of where developers live, which is in Git directly. So I think this has got some potential just by the buzzwords I'm reading anyways.
Yeah, so before now, GitGuardian has focused on discovering secrets and things that shouldn't be exposed in code. So pretty straightforward. They had two products. One is free and open for anybody to use if you're using a public code repository, I think specifically GitHub. And then the paid for version can also search private repositories. And I think it supports more like GitLab, Bitbucket, and also private repos on GitHub. And so this is, well, I mean, certainly $44 million. You can build a lot of product with that. This has them expanding into much more the code development pipeline, the AppSec feature set than what they're doing right now.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they butt their heads against SNCC and some others, though, given that one or two other companies have that GitOps approach to security as well. So it'll be neat to see if they're successful.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense. You see other folks, SNCC, $8 billion valuation. You see Orca, a bunch of these others, Laceworks, with huge raises. It makes sense for them to go in that direction, especially if they've already solved some scanning code at scale issues with their current product.
Absolutely.
Next one, Adlumin secures $25 million in Series B funding. Already starting to look small. $25 million for Series B. Casada raised $23 million in Series C funding. Grip Security raised. There was something interesting about Grip Security. They raised $19 million in a Series A. Yes, they are the latest Weil Ventures backed. Led by Intel Capital, but Weil Ventures kicked them off with a $6 million seed round. And so it looks like we're reaching this point where I've noticed cloud security, DLP, and data security are starting to get rebooted, and we're starting to see a secondary market of companies popping up with either more modern versions of it or just new takes on what's been tried in the past here. And this one looks like it's going after some of the CASB use cases. So it's a new take on securing the SaaS that your enterprise uses. Especially since the big thing with CASB is you have little control over SaaS products. So what can you do with some of these security issues and vendor management concerns?
CASB is barely a few years old. Like, is it really ripe for disruption already? Absolutely, because I think, so first of all, the model, like you needed tons of users. All the licensing was by user model, and it ended up being one of those things that I think a lot of organizations, some of their use cases only applied to maybe admins or executives or something like that, only a portion of their employees. So they, it was kind of tough to, and a lot of this is just based off of working with these companies, but there's some guesswork here that they just never really saw the deal sizes they needed to see for that model to work. That and implementing it was awkward at best. So I think where we ended up, the API-based ones made more sense, but there were a bunch of reverse proxy ones out there where Salesforce changed their website. All of a sudden, your CASB stuff would break in a really bad way. Nobody can use Salesforce now unless we either turn off the CASB or wait for Salesforce to, or not Salesforce, but the CASB vendor to, update their product. Yeah. So, I mean, it was a combination of things, but
that's the fastest market I've ever seen go from coming out of stealth to, like 75% of it being acquired. All that happened in like 3.5 years. It was really, really quick.
That's why I was saying, and I don't follow that market super closely. That's why I was saying, didn't it just start? Wasn't this market just born? But hey, it seems to have gone up and down and in and out very quickly.
It ran from 2013 to 2017, and now we're seeing the last stragglers kind of get picked up. Looks like Netscope will be able to, self-sufficient. They'll probably IPO at some point. BitGlass got picked up, I think. It seemed like on the cheap. I'm trying to remember who picked them up, but I can't at the moment. But most of them are gone. There are just a few stragglers left, and already cloud security too. We're seeing some of the last of the early cloud security vendors like Cloud Passage get picked up kind of on the cheap, and now all that's rebooting again. With the Laceworks and the Okta, or not Okta, Okra. No, not Okra.
Orca.
No, wrong.
Orca.
Okay.
Okra. That's what I'm going to start calling.
A lot of it's getting consumed by the SASE market as well, so it's transforming. Yeah. Netscope is a good example of that, taking what they had, moving it, rolling CASB into something, rolling other cloud security into something else, and now the hot new thing is SASE, right? So I think this is where this is going. This is an interesting space, right? What Grip Security does is, basically asset inventory for your SaaS apps. So it's a slice of what both your and my companies do, Tyler. And it'll be interesting to see, again, if this plays as a standalone or if it gets consumed into a larger market. I think probably the latter, but who knows?
Yeah.
All right, and Truffle Security was an interesting one as well.
I read that one. Truffle Hog, the tool, the secrets tool.
Mm-hmm.
Did the truffles go along with your okra, Adrian?
Yeah, might as well. We might as well make a meal out of it, right?
Might as well. Yeah, so that one's neat. I hope they get. They didn't take a whole lot. Truffle did 14. Well, I guess 14 million, led by Andreessen Horowitz. Based on their Truffle Hog open source tool. There's the multi-unicorn. I love the new unicorn icon with multi-horns. That one's neat because it's an open source tool. And actually, if you click on the link that's in the show notes, I love how this one's presented. It's just like, hey, here's what we do. Here's who we are. Thanks for
screenshot.
Yeah, I mean, I just love it. I think it's just super down to earth, and these are the guys that I hope win. I hope these guys really win.
Yeah, and it's I think part of the reason is because there's not a bunch. It wasn't a press release created by a committee or by a PR team or something like that. It was created by the founders, and you can tell, and that's it's refreshing. Yeah. All right. New VC firm, Ballistic Ventures, looks like we have another cybersecurity focused VC firm here, focused on early stage, seed stage, it sounds like. We've seen a ton of these. Ron Gula, YL Ventures, ForgePoint.
J-Leak's one, what is that? Sky, I think it is. J-Leak does.
Yeah, seen a bunch of these.
Yep, Sin Ventures.
And this one includes the only name I recognize was Kevin Mandia, is a strategic partner.
This is a stacked team here. Ted Schlein, Kleiner Perkins, I believe. Yep, Kleiner Perkins, Kevin Mandia, Barmack. He was former AT&T. Roger Thornton.
This is a very stacked team.
Was at Fortify and Allie involved. So, I mean, there's some heavy hitters here. It'll be interesting. I'm not sure what the world needs is more funding for cybersecurity, but good for these guys.
My only surprise on this. My only surprise on this one is that with announcing their firm, they're announcing the first close, which notice it says first close of first fund, targeting 250 million. So they don't have it quite fully funded yet, but they're shooting for 250 million on that first fund. That seems so small for them. For the how stacked the who's who is here. I mean, Ted Schlein can probably go get 500 to $1 billion on his own. Like, he's got that level of credibility. Throw in Mandia in there and a couple of these other folks. I'm surprised it's only 250.
Yeah, I mean, they are early stage, but we're seeing those early stage deals getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
That's right.
Yeah, seed rounds look like A's and B's from 5 or 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Another interesting one, Mimecast, being taken private by what I believe is a private equity firm in a $5.8 billion all-cash deal.
Wow.
So that's a big one. If I recall, where were they public on? NASDAQ?
Probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a PE play.
Yeah, so that's a huge one. So it'll be interesting to see. And if I can recall, they've done pretty well in the public market. They didn't have wasn't a fire eye situation or anything like that. I haven't followed them recently, but I think they've done relatively well out of all the public cybersecurity companies. So I have no idea what the plan is here with them. If they're gonna be some kind of strategic acquisitions or something like that, turn them back out, send them back into the public market. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just looking at their overall ticker price. Definitely have been doing well, certainly over the last couple months anyway. So it'll be interesting to see what the PE firm does. Typically, these guys will restructure, acquire them in, restructure them, squeeze them a little bit, introduce some operating efficiencies, and then re-roll them out somewhere or sell them to somebody else. So.
Oh, that unicorn with all the horns, that was the decacorn. It had 10 horns.
That's the Unicron.
No, decacorn, because it was 10 horns on its head.
All right, fair enough. This one, we got to trim off 2 of them, Goose, because this is only an octacorn that we're talking about. Actually, what was it, 5.8 or 8.5? I don't remember. It doesn't matter.
Well, I was saying 8, but, in another month, I'll probably wish I'd said 10.
Yeah,
it was 5.8, so you're both right.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. We're both right.
Yeah, so let's move on from all the funding and the market stuff, and we've got some trends, some new products here, some other interesting stuff. One, I forget the name of the company that got hacked. Found out they had been hacked for 5 years, and ran most of the world's SMS messages ran through this company, and they tried to make light of it. This case, number 15 here is what we're looking at. If you're following along while listening at home, seems a lot worse to me than casually finding out you're hacked for 5 years. And so this hasn't been proven yet. This is alleged that this leadership at this company was selling access to SMS messages. A Swiss company, no less.
Well, from my understanding, and I have very limited understanding of it, but from my understanding, they originally ran a company that when you did like 2FA, would send the SMS for you on behalf, and then they started actually just sending those codes to other third-party governments, right? I mean, there's no is this shady or not? This is just we're just going to sell shit to other government agencies because they're willing to pay us a lot of money for it.
Yeah, they started out doing automated text messages. Probably all of us get some of these, retail promotions and stuff like that. Reminders, you've got a doctor's appointment coming up, that kind of thing. And yeah, I guess security codes, was just different data, same use case, right?
Yeah, and then in later in the article actually states that the company co-founder and COO, Ilya Gorlik, was also providing another service, selling access to Mito's networks to secretly locate people via their phone. So not just enough to send the SMS, but actually physically find out where that person is located.
Oh.
Contracting with government agencies, according to employees. Absolutely disturbing.
Yeah.
It is disturbing, but it's not hugely surprising because all of these technologies are dual use, and they always are, because if you can do good with them, you can do bad with them as well. And this isn't the first time we've had this problem with mobile surveillance at all. We have euphemism, lawful interception, but it's surveillance and it's mass surveillance, and we know that, and it's creepy to think about and it's horrible to think about, but it's not surprising. I agree with Adrian. Part of what's surprising is that it's a Swiss company and most of the engineers worked in Germany. So that's a little twist on a theme, right? But I don't think the idea that somebody would take something that's potentially digitally transformative, the ability to ping your customers, your patients, your whomever, and say, hey, your appointment's coming up, please press C to confirm or whatever, they would take that and use that because it's just too easy to take it and turn it on its head. And so I don't think that part's terribly surprising. Gross, disgusting, yeah.
Let me throw a question to the two of you, though. Like, if we say that, okay, sure, so they're selling physical locations of people or selling some SMS information that transferred back and forth. How is that any different than Facebook selling all of our stuff that we look for, or Google selling our searches? Like, is location any different than what I search? And I'm not suggesting that either is good. I'm simply suggesting that is it really as bad as we initially think of from an ethical standpoint? And I don't think there's a clear answer. I think it's a gray area that everybody's going to have their own standards on.
Well, it's how the company handles it. I think it's clear to most people that, when you use Google, you're part of the product, and that they monetize that stuff. Whereas in this case, like, I pay Verizon, like I've got this brand phone with this, telco, I've never even heard of this other company, that's selling my data. I think that's where some of the trouble is a lot of this stuff is invisible to the consumer, or even the enterprise. And, these are not third-party vendor issues. These are fourth, fifth, sixth party vendor issues. There's not a great public understanding of all the hands that this data is flowing through.
Yeah,
I agree with you to an extent. I agree that part of the problem is the downstream effect. But I think, Adrian, you're taking into account that you are, and a lot of the people you surround yourself with, are aware of what this data monetization means. I think there's a huge part of the population, even if you're talking about Facebook, even if you're talking about Google, don't quite understand the implications of using these services. I know it seems crazy, but I really don't think that it's as straightforward as you think, or those of us on this call, or those of us who are listening to this podcast think, because they're not really actually thinking about it. And there's sneaky behavior on the part of some of these tech companies. It really, every time you do an update, you have to change your security permissions. And if you don't do it right away, or if you forget or whatever, they can change your position and start tracking your location. They can change your permissions, rather, start tracking your location, start saving your web history, start doing all of these things. That is a little sneaky and underhanded. And, I've gotten caught on it. And I live and breathe this stuff every day, just like everybody listening and watching. It's not as straightforward as, well, it's Google and everybody knows it's the product. It's even if that were the case, some of the things that they do make it really hard to protect your own privacy, to protect your own data, especially in the US. I think.
I've got to say, it's the number one question I get when I talk to non-technical people and they find out what I do. They ask me privacy questions about the big tech companies. That's the number one question I get. In fact, I've been frustrated trying to get a hold of the artist who did, not the one in blue, but all the other ones, from the tree over to the window here, that does our posters for B-Sides Knoxville. And I think part of the reason I couldn't get a hold of him is I was using my Gmail account to try and get in touch with him. And one of our other organizers finally got in touch with him and found out like he won't touch or get near anything Google related. And very much traditional artist, all this stuff is silk screened. He does, specifically this kind of psychedelic 70s looking, rock concert poster, album cover type art. And you're very, very much, not a technical person, but very, very untrustful of Google.
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially, and I think we can wrap the privacy discussion with this because I think we could talk about it all day. But even if you rewind 10 years, right? Did you get those questions about privacy 10 years ago? I know I didn't, or even 15 years ago. I know, right? And so that's kind of a newer phenomenon for the mass public to ask those kinds of questions. And if we talk about this particular case, I think we found it early, but they could keep doing this easily enough and just say, hey, it's our data. We sell the data. That's just tough, right? So from an ethical standpoint, it's a very, very difficult problem and certainly difficult to solve.
Yeah. It hit mainstream media a couple of years ago, and I think that's a big part of it. Is some of these are becoming mainstream media stories, and I assume that's how most people find out about it.
Yep, for sure.
So yeah, the next one, another potential criminal case here. In fact, I think this might be more than potential. The previous, the Swiss company, and the folks involved with that one is more alleged, whereas the reason that Ubiquiti had a big breach earlier this year turns out to be an internal employee trying to sell his employer's data back to them, trying to extort them from data he stole from the company. Yeah, how'd that work out?
Doesn't quite have the ethical gray area of the previous one, right, Tyler?
That's right. There's no gray area on this one. I think this is pretty clear cut. You screwed up.
And I love if you read the article, you go in and he's like, well, he thought he was good because he was on a VPN. That was my favorite part.
Watch too many YouTube videos. Yeah, posing as an anonymous hacker sent the company a nearly $2 million ransom demand.
And then he went in and changed the logs. They clearly didn't have an eye on that. So he was good. He used a VPN. He changed the logs. Good to go.
Yeah, and then he tried to pose as an anonymous company whistleblower.
This is good. This should be a movie. He shouldn't get any royalties from it, but this should be a movie of like stupid hacker tricks or something.
Yeah, it's and he just cloned hundreds of private GitHub repos. It sounds like so he was taking code. Yeah,
you're toast.
Yep. Yeah, run into this all the time. Actually, back when I used to be an incident handler, we had all kinds of insider things, and it was so funny because part of what they did was it was the same pattern every time. It was like some of what they did was really brilliant, how they thought through it, and you can tell they really obsessively thought through it, but to a certain point, to the point where they didn't really understand how things worked. And then it was just as dumb as you can imagine, like so easy to catch them. So speaking of mobile security, Sentinel-1 is trying to bring it back, Tyler.
Sentinel-1? What are they bringing back?
Singularity Mobile.
Sexy back?
Listen to this tagline. Combat the rising tide of mobile threats with on-device adaptive real-time mobile defense. Is there a tide of mobile threats that I haven't seen somewhere?
No, there's not.
I didn't think so.
Nope, definitely there isn't, and I'm not exactly sure why anybody would pay for this. Maybe they bundle an MDM from the management side of it, and that's where they're going to try to hook people. I haven't looked at this deep enough to know, but if you're just talking about mobile protection, it's kind of pointless.
Katie, do you want to install an IPS on your phone?
Yeah, sure. I'll do it over VPN while we're at it.
Yeah.
We can just install it over VPN.
How many ways can I kill my connectivity here? And they're very quick to say, oh, it's not going to hurt your battery too bad. But
too bad. Not going to hurt it too bad.
Again,
is that technical lingo too bad?
I remember Imperium had a product here, ZIPS, and just never found anybody really using it.
Shocking.
Yeah, I mean, really, what this is, in looking at the website, is it's an extension to their Singularity XDR product, and they're just saying it's just another endpoint and another endpoint that they're going to pull data from and protect against. And so, I don't think it's going to get a ton of pickup, but it is potentially a check the box feature in a broader XDR solution.
So I am testing Palo Alto's Cortex XDR right now, and they do have a mobile app. I can't recall if they have one for iOS, but they do for Android. And as far as I can tell, it's just checking the apps on your phone. It might be doing something a little bit deeper there, maybe some configuration checks, maybe checking to see if the phone is rooted. But the main thing that I've noticed is it's just checking the apps on your phone to see if any of them are malicious.
Yeah, and honestly, the main thing it's doing is checking a box so that the analyst firms go, yep, they've got it. That's literally it.
Yep. All right, next tool here, PIP audit. Good to start seeing this. So apparently Google is backing this in some way. I don't fully understand how Google is backing it, but a couple of folks from Trail of Bits, William Woodruff and Alex Cameron of Trail of Bits put together a tool to look for vulnerabilities in Python packages. So, if you're dependent on stuff from PyPy, and this is just something I think we're going to continue to see, especially, we've had a few items in the news about the NPM package library, and some attackers getting access to packages there, attaching malware to it. So this is long overdue. Good to see, especially open source software you can use to protect or scan the packages that you're grabbing.
Yeah, this is simultaneously to me a where have you been all my life and a why did you bother now scenario. And what I mean by that is where have you been all my life, because it just makes sense that when I install through pip or whatever a package to just do a quick audit on it, right? That makes total sense. Where have you been all my life? That's the obvious, should be there. But then why now? Because I most likely have SNCC in my GitHub or Dependapot built into my GitHub, or I'm using some other dependency checker anyway. So kind of a who cares at the same time. I think the big benefit for what I see here is the small developer, the individual developer, those people that are not running a bigger tool for security within their code, they'll just pip audit everything, and that's just a great free service. So I'm very, very happy with it for that.
I think the average person would be shocked at how few heavily funded startups are probably going to go with the open source tool. And if there wasn't one, they would just be going without anything.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, they won't. They won't use the open source tool. They're going to use something built into their CI/CD pipeline or built into their GitHub repository. Think? Yeah. Why would I have my developers run pip audit ever? Doesn't make sense.
Well, I was arguing that you wouldn't see them going for a large commercial solution like SNCC.
No, well, my point is they're already going for. Are you talking about the enterprises going for SNCC or the individuals?
No, early stage startups.
Oh, early stage. I heard companies, bigger companies. 100%. Early stage startups. You're spot on. They don't use anything at all. So this is a great benefit to them.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's why they built it. in the article, they talk about, the fact that there was really nothing license free or open source to do this. So that's why they made it.
Yeah. And I mean, it goes with my commentary about individual developers, right? Individual developers are the same thing as early stage startups.
Yeah. Katie?
Yeah. Trailbits has really been very good over the years about supplying free or near free tools to the developer community just to make it better, really believing in the mission. So this isn't surprising to see for them. And, it's great if it helps even just a little bit.
That's the key. If it even helps a little bit, then it's awesome. Thank you for putting it out.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, Trailbits also gets credit for building the Mac OS pieces for OS Query.
Yeah. I think they did. I think you're absolutely right. They've done a ton of amazing open source work over the years. Their founders, whose name is escaping me, I love the guy. He's just such a nice guy. Yes.
Dan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Guido. He's always been steeped in that background and persona, and the whole team that he's worked with and built up over the years really focuses on this. It's pretty impressive the quantity and quality of open source stuff they built.
Yeah, their commitment to the community is great. Obviously, they're getting plenty of business otherwise. That they have the availability to do this, but I think it all goes hand in hand. That they do really good work. They make their money where they need to make money and then give back to the community.
Yep.
CISA's advisory panel is set to make recommendations on major cyber topics. Katie, did you want to take this one?
I had much greater hopes for this article when I originally saw it this morning before I read it, because the article doesn't actually say what's going to happen. It just says that there are going to be good things coming. There are a lot of really smart people, again, on the panel, like we talked about with the new VC firm coming out. So a lot of good people coming together. Hopefully this will be a joint effort. There won't be any opposite side of the aisle funding about this, because it looks like it's getting into some political issues, and cybersecurity, in my opinion, just shouldn't be at all. So there really wasn't as much meat here as I was hoping when you sent the article over, but this. Hopefully this is an indication of more concerted things to come.
It's interesting looking at who they've got in there. Jeff Moss is in there. Nicole Perlroth, cybersecurity reporter, journalist, who just this is How They Tell Me the World Ends, I think is the book she just released recently. Ted Schlein, who we just talked about, Matthew Prince of Cloudflare, Stephen Schmidt, CISO of, or is he CISO still of AWS? Very, very interesting lineup here. Alex Stamos always seems to be connected to these sorts of things. Yeah, it definitely a who's who. So it'd be interesting to see what they do with it, if anything. Hopefully, it's more than just for show.
Yeah, I mean, they've got some heavy hitters. They've got real practitioners. They've got people who've done some amazing things, have really moved some mountains in cybersecurity. But it's CISA, so I don't think we're going to see anything immediately from them. I hope I'm wrong. But when they say we're at a pivotal moment here, I think that's true. But I'm a little less enthusiastic about what's going to happen. Because the new executive order on cybersecurity that didn't really do much to advance cybersecurity, really. So hopefully this will be something. But cautiously optimistic over here.
All right, next up we have a spicy take. I want to do more of these. Keep an eye out for, in fact, feel free to send us any if you see any spicy takes. But this spicy take, speaking of Matthew Prince, Cloudflare's CEO, if you take a picture unplugging your Palo Alto Networks firewalls, you could win a trip to Oahu. You could win a trip to Hawaii.
I love this.
I don't know why they picked Palo Alto. I think part of it is just the name, the location, Palo Alto, California. In the pandemic, some folks said, hey, if we're going to work remote anyway, we're going to move from the valley to Hawaii. So I think it's maybe just the coincidence of the name pointing to the location here that got them picked on.
Yeah, well, it is, but also Cloudflare is a cloud-based firewall essentially, and they're saying, hey, dump your legacy garbage and come up to a cloud-native one, and yeah, we'll give you a chance to win. Yeah,
so it's always funny, when vendors go this marketing route and and start throwing some shade at their competitors. It's fun for us.
Oh yeah, it definitely gives us some interesting topics, like the chili peppers and warning hot take up top. So super cool. I love it.
Yep. And our squirrel story of the day is Salesforce Plus, which putting a plus on the end of something these days means it's a streaming service, and that's exactly what it means in this case. So I did a double take when I tripped upon this the other day. And sure enough, I mean, it's like looking at the dashboard, like logging into Discovery Plus, like a lot of similar style, like reality style, talking to small business owners who are struggling through the pandemic, those kinds of TV bits.
Yeah. So actually, funny enough, for those that don't know, well, I guess everybody knows, but I'm CMO at a high-tech startup, and we've been leaning very heavily into video, like trying to do more and more video content. And right now, one of the problems that we have is we're distributing a lot of stuff on YouTube and Twitch, right? So we have channels and like everybody else. What's really neat here is, and I know this was meant to be a tongue-in-cheek squirrel joke, why are they doing this kind of scenario? But I think I actually grasp it and understand it, right? If they're putting out high quantities of content in a video format, let's make it easy to grasp in a way that people are used to. So, hey, good for them.
Maybe it's the Quibi of customer relationship management.
I don't know.
The bombshell is I watched some of it and it's decent. Yeah. The stuff I watched at least is it's not all native. Some of it's native. Some of it is licensed. Looks like they've hired other firms to produce it. But a lot of it's pretty decent.
So what is it like? Here's how to sell. Here's how to convert your customers, or?
Yeah, so they've got different shows with different points. So yeah, one of them is definitely like, here's a better way to approach sales. Here's a better way to use SDRs. Here's a wrong way to do it. So it's certainly relevant to what Salesforce does and what they sell. But then like one of the other shows was just a lot of it were interviews with small business owners, that struggled through the pandemic, and interviewing them about how they survived and how they evolved to survive the pandemic.
Hey, let me throw this at you, Adrian. Bloomberg Television had to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It started with Bloomberg terminals that all of the traders used on their desks. That was what the company was based on. And all of a sudden, Bloomberg TV came out of it. I'm not surprised, and I wouldn't be surprised if this does well.
I mean, it's, the first stab at it, there isn't a ton of content on there, but the stuff that's on there is well thought out, well produced. The interface is slick and feels and looks like any other streaming service with the punctuation plus after its name.
I think we need an ESW plus. Oh, wait, that would be redundant.
That would be redundant. We're already a streaming service.
Dang it.
And on that bombshell, thanks so much, Tyler and Katie, for joining me today. And a big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We'll see you next week.